start with an initial limit of 7 minutes, but that will be significantly reduced as time goes on. It doesn't apply, of course, to Mr. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had the fiction and now it's time for the fact. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to open the final day of the budget debate for the opposition, and I beg to move the amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition and my right honourable and honourable friends. This budget was sold as ending austerity, and it doesn't do that remotely. It's a budget of failure. It's a budget of broken promises. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're not opposed to any modest benefit, however modest that may be, for lower and middle income earners. And that measure is the only one that puts some money into their pockets. But we also need support for those who don't reach the lower threshold. That's why we support a real living wage and the restoration of sectoral collective bargaining and trade union rights. But obviously, putting more money into the pockets of higher earners is wrong, which is why the next Labour government will only increase taxes on the very wealthiest, that's people with incomes in the top 5%, and the corporations who've had a tax cut under the Tories. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Could he clarify for the House what the opposition would regard as the very wealthiest?
Well, clearly the Honourable Gentleman wasn't listening to what I said. It's in our amendment. It's also in the manifesto from the last general election. It's those people in the top 5% of incomes. So that is very clear. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour's amendment sets out the changes to income taxation that we would introduce in order to achieve that. I will give way.
Does the Honourable Gentleman accept that the people who are in the income bracket that he describes are likely to be the most mobile and will therefore simply take their wealth somewhere else?
Well, it's very interesting that members opposite seem not to want to have a fair taxation system where those that have done the best out of society can pay back into society. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And my honourable friend, would you not agree that the Welfare Reform Acts of 2012 and 16 have caused £34 billion worth of cuts? These cuts have resulted in 14 million people, including 4 million children, living in poverty. Exactly. The government reduces the deficit by taking from the poor instead of those who have much more, the wealthy.
Exactly. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I think that whatever this government says, austerity is far from over for those people who require our help through the social security system. Turning to communities, it was only a few weeks ago, in a speech that began with the Prime Minister dancing across the stage, that we were told austerity is over. After almost a decade now of cuts that have made life difficult for families across the country, I expect many people welcomed the news coming out of Birmingham, breathing a sigh of relief. No longer would they have to visit food banks after work because they couldn't afford to eat. No longer would they feel unsafe in their neighbourhoods after 21,000 police officers had been cut. No longer would too many people be left shivering in the cold, unable to afford somewhere to live, with nowhere to turn. And no longer would local councillors worry about balancing their books, worrying about providing care for the vulnerable children, or worrying about ensuring dignity for elderly people in their community who need the care that the councils should be providing. Fast forward to the budget presented to the House this week, and many people will have been left bitterly disappointed. This is not an end to austerity, but merely more of the same. 2/3 of the welfare benefit cuts planned by the government will still happen. Head teachers will still be forced to write begging letters to parents to pay for the basics. No wonder then that their reaction to the little extras referred to by the Chancellor, a frankly insulting term to schools at a time when the independent pay review body has said that they do not have the resources to give any pay rise to their staff, was so badly received. And teachers' pay is down £4,000 in real terms since 2010. And head teachers are writing home to parents to ask for donations just to keep their services at current levels. I will give way.
From giving way, this budget has delivered a tax cut for 32 million people. Can he clarify Labour's position? Because the Shadow Chancellor says he supports this, and the Leader of the Opposition says he doesn't. What is Labour's policy? What is Labour's policy?
Well, as I was on to education, I would say to the Honourable Gentleman, must try harder, go to the back of the class and pay attention. And £1.3 billion of cuts, no, I won't give way, hardwired into the system.
Order. I said we'd be fair to everyone, and that means Mr. Gwynn too. Mr. Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And £1.3 billion of cuts next year, hardwired into the system. And the Secretary of State can shake his head, but this statistics come from the Tory-led Local Government Association. Will devastate councils that are already struggling. Austerity is certainly not over for local government. Councils were the first and perhaps the easiest target of the coalition government. And they've had to endure some of the largest cuts across the public sector. No, I'm going to make some progress. After all, by cutting funding to councils, ministers have shifted the blame onto councillors, including their own local councillors. Our councils of all political persuasions and none are now at breaking point. The results of this on our communities is plain to see across the country. More than 500 children's centres shut down, 475 libraries closed, support for disabled children stripped away, like the transport that helped disabled children get to school and learn like their friends. Support for older people has been slashed. 1.4 million older people are now not getting the necessary help to carry out essential tasks such as washing themselves and dressing. Bus routes have been cut. Our roads are in disrepair, and before the government lauds the £420 million for potholes, there's a £1 billion backlog created by this government's cuts. Swimming pools are closed, leisure centres and community spaces are closed, bin collections have been reduced, youth clubs have closed, planning departments have been stripped out, trading standards have been slashed, leaving more at risk of fraud or dodgy goods, and street lights have been turned off to save money. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. And we're seeing the impact of all of these cuts in Derbyshire, where we've had social care, elderly people not getting care packages, early help for children being cut, libraries being threatened. Does my honourable friend agree that these cuts are actually contributing to a long-term growth in older people in hospital, in children being taken into care, and they are not only cruel but a false economy?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because all it does is cost shunt onto other parts of the public sector, and that is not a sustainable way of continuing. And sadly, I could give many, many more examples. But this government's answer to these problems wasn't to drop the £1.3 billion cut to funding next year, or to properly address the crises in social care and children's services. It was to offer mere crumbs from the table, and that will do little to fix the problem that has been created. I will give way.
the honourable gentleman for giving way. I've listened to his speech with great interest, but he didn't answer the question put to him by my honourable friend, the member for Aldershot. You have the Shadow Chancellor saying he supports the tax cuts. You have the Leader of the Opposition saying he doesn't support the tax cuts. Where does he stand?
Yeah, come on, answer the question.
Let me make it very clear, in case the honourable gentleman hasn't recognised, this is not a Labour budget. A Labour budget would look very different. But we will not restrict the extra money for the lowest paid in our country in the votes tonight. But what we will do is we will rectify the giveaways to the top in a Labour budget when we have that Labour government offering hope for the future. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that the Chief Secretary to the Treasury believes that the government hasn't cut local government budgets. But the fact is this: since 2010, spending power, and that's the government's preferred measure, has fallen by 28.6%. That includes the 49.1% cut that local authorities have seen in central government grants. And yes, it also includes the new powers given to local authorities to raise local funds. But the reality is, a 1% increase in her council tax raises sufficiently more than a 1% increase in the council tax in my area. And she can shake her head, but if she doesn't understand that those areas that are predominantly Band A and Band B properties do not raise the same amount of money than those areas that have higher council tax properties, then perhaps she ought not to be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. I want to make this clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the Government Treasury front bench appear to have found these calculations very difficult. Because the Chief Secretary did tell Newsnight, and I quote, "We are not making cuts to local authorities. What we've done is given them more revenue-raising powers so that decisions can be taken locally." But the fact is, I'm very happy to provide the Government front bench with the calculations that have been provided by the Tory-led Local Government Association, or the National Audit Office, or the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And they've gone further and they've provided us with the analysis of how these cuts have fallen across the country. And they say the most deprived authorities, including Barking and Dagenham, Birmingham and Salford, have made an average cut to spending per person of 32%, compared to 17% in the least deprived areas, including Warwickshire, Wiltshire and Dorset. These hardest hit councils have been dealt a second blow by the government's reliance on council tax to fund the struggling social care sector, being unable to raise anything like enough money through the social care precept as councils in wealthier areas. And the Secretary of State can shake his head, but this year, Tameside Council, one of the two authorities that makes up my constituency, has a £16 million social care funding gap. 1% on council tax in Tameside brings in £750,000. The Tamesides of this world are never able to fill that social care gap from council tax, and that is what is so unfair. Instead of the much-needed reform we need to see on social care, this budget has shown once again a government committed to sticking plaster solutions. No green paper, no long-term plan. Just as the £1.3 billion cut hits next year, they'll need to find £1.5 billion next year just to keep social care running. Behind these figures are real people that need help. And the government sits idly by. The government's small contribution to alleviating this crisis will sadly be, for many people, far too little, and for many councils, far too late. One of the most sacred values and duties of any government is to ensure that the most vulnerable in society are protected. And with overspending on children's services hitting a new high of £800 million a year, the Chancellor's pledge of £84 million for just 20 councils, I'd be interested, by the way, to know which 20 they are, comes nowhere close to addressing the national crisis. And in our neighbourhoods, Madam Deputy Speaker, both crime and the fear of crime is rising. But yet in this week's budget, there was not a single penny extra offered for neighbourhood policing. The National Audit Office and the Home Affairs Select Committee are warning that without funding, our police service is teetering on the edge of collapse. The numbers of police officers have already fallen by 21,000 since 2010. And the independent police watchdog is warning, and I quote, that lives of vulnerable people could be at risk. But instead of fixing this problem, the Treasury sees that it's fit to play fast and loose with the public safety, with a £165 million raid on pensions. We are now in the unprecedented situation where police chiefs are threatening legal action against this government. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police has warned that upcoming budget cuts could take officer numbers back to levels last seen in 1975, wiping out the 50 additional officers that have been funded by the council tax precept this year, with another 600 officers needing to be cut on top of the 2,000 that we've already lost because of this government's mess on pensions. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cheshire has written to me and he said austerity is far from over there. The funding pressures going forward, they could face 250 police officers cut from the front line, that patch alone.
Absolutely. And if honourable and right honourable members opposite really cared about the safety of our citizens, about the soaring crime in some of our communities, then the way that they could have fixed that would have been to stop the police cuts. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget showed that this is not a government interested in our public safety. It's not interested in our children's future, or our elderly, or our public sector workers, our doctors, our nurses, our teachers, our police officers, our firefighters. It's not interested in the disabled. Indeed, it's not interested in our constituents. Politics is always a question of priorities, and this government has clearly got its priorities wrong. Since 2010, they've handed out £110 billion in tax giveaways to the richest and to the corporations, but the services that most people rely on have been cut to the bone and to breaking point. In the coming days and weeks, as the children's centres and the libraries remain closed, as roads continue to go without repair, as crime continues to rise, people will recognise that the Prime Minister's promise to end austerity has been broken. In fact, it was a mirage from the start. We need a fresh approach, a real end to austerity, investment in our communities, and a government intent on rebuilding Britain for the many and not the few.